Hello and welcome to When I Stop Fighting, the podcast, hosted by Daryl Dittmer, where we talk about the fight or fights that so many of us engage in this lifetime, as well as ways to potentially relieve ourselves of those fights. Let's get started. Welcome to When I Stop Fighting, the podcast. My name is Daryl Dittmer. Today, I'm joined by one of my great friends of 35 plus years, Tony Hoskins, a guy who was in my first book by his actual name, a college classmate and teammate of mine, a very successful entrepreneur, and an all-around good dude. One of my favorite things about my longtime friend is that he adheres to a code. So great to have you on, brother.
Thanks, Daryl. Appreciate you having me here.
Yeah, of course. It's funny because I've thought about, I know, I did one with Norm, and I have, different people but I've sort of ventured into the realm of having, having people that I've known for a long, long time, and college friends, and who knows, maybe I'll even dive into some high school friends at some point. But I just think it's a cool way to look at life and what has happened, and everybody has a story. And you and I have been in touch, pretty closely ever since college. I mean, there might
Absolutely.
be a little bit of time that we didn't necessarily, but you've had your story and I've had my story, and we've both been very busy. We've both, taken more or less an entrepreneurial path to our lives. And, I think that's the most interesting part. So let's catch up with that, if you don't mind. Just, your story a little bit, what, where you came from, and
Sure.
what brings you where you are now.
Absolutely. So, Daryl and I met when I was 18 years old. I still laugh about that because I have a memory that is, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I can tell you what the man was wearing, where we were at, and where he was walking. I don't know who wears vertical striped shorts, but he thought they were cool back then. But that's when I first met Daryl. I thought I was the guy that was going to be the starting center. And I'm like, oh, shit, here's someone big as me. I'm in trouble. But Daryl and I you and I have had a very similar upbringing, right? Very, middle class, if you would call that. I would say maybe on the lower end of that middle class echelon at times. But I was actually adopted when I was 2 weeks old by a family in the Oakland County area. Grew up in the Waterford, Michigan area. So graduated high school in 87 and ended up at Adrian College, which honestly is a big highlight of my life. I cannot thank that school enough, and the relationships of friends and things I've got. And I really do think that people that go to these huge schools don't have the relationships like we have. When you throw in Willie and all these other folks in there, I mean, it's pretty special.
It is.
Got out of college, when I went to school in 87, 5 years later, because, school is hard. Took 5 years to get out of it. Went in with a business degree, which was hot then. 5 years later, which is a thing about following trends and being smart, business degrees were dog. In 1992, I didn't what am I going to do? I find myself scraping by the barrel. Dad retired from GM at 50, at 32 years, and moved to Kentucky. Asked me the day of the move if I wanted to go. And I said, not a chance. I'll figure this out on my own. Ended up living on friends' couches, doing what I had to do to survive, and worked for a repo company for a couple of years. Tough lessons learned then. No pay, tough hours, stressful job, dealing with very difficult situations in people's lives. My whole goal then was this can't be the life that I went to school for. I didn't spend all this time and effort to get educated to do this stuff. So I decided to go back to grad school at that time, got into grad school and realized that my student abilities had surpassed my appetite. Remember my first course, graduate level calculus. I'm going, I was lost within a month, and it was just horrible. And in beginning a job at that point at Georgia Pacific, and that's when I made my decision that I had to do better, which was a lumber company, the largest one in the world, probably.
I remember that.
Yep. Yeah. Got in there, and then my mindset changed immediately. What am I going to do? I said, I want to get into a big company with no ceiling. And a company like that, which was several $1 billion, provided me that opportunity. I was there for a handful of years, was very successful at that company. They wanted to transfer me to Boca Raton, Florida when they consolidated the company. And I was just too young and too scared to make a move like that. And Boca Raton at that time was not a place that you wanted to live anyway. And I'm like, there's got to be more than this and that. So I took a chance. I took a buyout from them and had no job for probably 90 days and worked my tail off to try to find the right career. And the right career found me. So a company called Computer Associates wanted people that had hardcore sales skills, knew what they were doing in terms of people etiquette, how to work with people and how to deal with things. And they took me in as basically a trainee. And then at that point, I knew this is where I could make my mark. I mean, I couldn't use Excel. I didn't know anything about technology at all. I remember calling a friend of mine when I was looking up the getting prepared for my interview. And there's this technical term in there. It was capital I, capital T. And I called up this guy and I said, what does this IT mean? He's like, you're so screwed. You have no chance of getting this job. This is information technology. There's no chance. This is a joke. This is a joke. So I ended up getting into that company. And at that point, I knew that this is my chance to actually make a difference, right? For myself, for my career, for my life. And I started there, I think I was 28 years old and knew very little, but it was an opportunity to really grow into something. And that company afforded me an opportunity to grow into a senior vice president. And at one point, I was there for about 17 years. And I thought I would finish my career there. And some colleagues of mine that I had worked for went and took over a company in downtown Detroit, CompuWare, which was a very large software company. They called me up with an opportunity to take over Latin America, part of the U.S. and Canada, and with ownership, from equity. So I jumped at that opportunity and moved there, and the rest, was up to me. I mean, it really was up to me when I got the job at CA, what I was going to do with it. And I made the best of it. Jumped into the job at CompuWare, but prior to that at CA, I also realized that working 78 hours a week, covering 6 time zones, didn't afford me a lifestyle. It didn't afford me a lifestyle. It afforded me the opportunity to make a bunch of money, but in terms of having much free time, anything else, it was pretty tough. And the stress of that job was heavy. The rewards were worth it, but to continue to do that well into your 50s didn't make sense to me. So about 11 years ago from today, I took what I call an educated chance. And maybe we can talk more about that later. But a cousin of mine had been in the hospitality industry, specifically bars and restaurants. And him and I were just talking about business, and he had lost some of his businesses during the downturn in Michigan in that 2008 timeframe when everybody kind of got burned across the country for that matter. So we talked about it. We came down to Florida, met the franchise owners of the businesses that we're in now, did the analysis, and I had the capital, he had the skill set. And that's why I talk about an educated chance. I didn't jump into something I had no knowledge of. Like, I don't know how many people I've met that, hey, I make great food, I'm going to open a restaurant. You don't know anything about a restaurant. Daryl, this is better than anybody else. Just because you make a great taco or a hamburger doesn't mean you can open a restaurant, because you don't know anything about the rest of it. So we jumped into this a little over 11 years ago with one location. We now have 4 locations, have been very successful with it. And, it's been quite a journey from where I started from a kid in Waterford, just getting by from repoing couches and TVs and washers and dryers in the city to where I am now. So, that's kind of the bulk of the story there, but it's been a good upbringing, folks still around, and I've got an older brother as well too.
Very cool, man. Yeah. Thanks for sharing your story. I mean, it's fascinating because one thing I say on some of these podcasts is, when I'm talking about my story, or if I'm a guest on a podcast, one of the things I mention is, growing up in Michigan, it seemed to me as though everybody's dad worked at either GM, Ford, or Chrysler, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my dad was a mechanic, and I know your dad worked at Ford, and GM, so yeah, it's what was that?
GM, Daryl.
GM.
Yeah.
I don't know why I thought Ford. That's like a horrible thing to even say. That's why you own GM supercars.
There you go.
Anyway, yeah, sorry about that. I was, but that's how it went. I mean, my dad was a GM guy. Your guy was a GM guy. Yeah,
I mean, honestly, we were brought up to the thought pattern that if you could get in the GM and get a a white collar job, you had made it. You were just, man, you killed it. And that was it. And I can still laugh about this. I remember between working at Georgia Pacific, I was literally living in a basement in Inkster, with sheets for walls and living on a pull-out couch. And you can imagine what the wash tub was for. So it was just what life was about then. And I realized then that this was not a life I was going to deal with, the mediocrity I had, that there was more that I could offer. And luckily I met some people along the way, that influenced my life greatly, that, kind of brought out that inner talent that I had and also helped me recognize it too. And we talked about this before too. I also met some people along the way that, you realize, hey, this is what not to be.
Right. No, I've met plenty of those people in my life, and more of the ones I met were earlier on in my life that I had to change. But yeah, all along the way, I mean, business is a tough place, and I was involved in, some pretty hardcore sales. I know you've been involved in some pretty hardcore sales, and and then we took sort of our entrepreneurial path. But I look at it like I believe it's 100% true. When you're in sales and I was 100% commission. I don't know if you were 100% commission or however that worked, but you're an entrepreneur because you're creating a business within a business, and even though you've got kind of that sort of maybe larger umbrella over you, you still have to create your own business within that. And that's not an easy thing to do. So I give you a ton of credit. And I've been so happy over the years to watch the evolution and watch things change for you and get different and then significantly better. And just watching your success has been cool.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, and likewise for you too, from you selling water filters and subliminal tapes to, me doing skip tracing and getting people's licenses revoked because they didn't pay their bills. I mean, the stuff we did, and face it, some of it was just flat out a necessity because we needed a roof over our heads and we needed to feed ourselves. And, my dad still tells me this. He's like, I felt so bad that day when, you were basically just out of college and I was leaving the state and just kind of left you on your own, with really nowhere to go. And luckily a friend tucked me in, and I said, that was the best thing you could ever do to me. I said, it made me, what's the words, buck up or shut up, and I just said, this is time to go. And I've got to make it my own way because no one's going to help me.
I love it. Yeah, no, 100%, man. Which brings me to, as I was thinking about this, as you were talking, like our dads grew up our dads were very similar in terms of our upbringing.
Absolutely.
What would you say that you learned, I guess, most importantly from that upbringing or from your dad or from your mom? Like what have you carried through to today?
I never really thought about this in detail, but my dad was very stoic, didn't show a lot of emotions, and anybody who's been around me long enough knows that's me. I mean, if I've been accused of being a robot once, I've been accused of being a robot 1,000 times. It's because I don't get frazzled in stressful situations. I can sit back and analyze what's going on and figure out the best way out of it to resolve a conflict or get a win or whatever. But Dad was very stoic, never showed a lot of emotions. And he might, if he sees this, he might disagree with me, but I will bet a car against his dollar that this is the true story. I don't think I've ever told my dad I loved him, and I don't think he's ever told me he loved me. It is so known, we never had to say it. He's just kind of that man's man. And I never needed that affirmation from him at all. I knew it was always there via his actions. So, Dad was very much, take care of your family, take care of your own, do what you say and do it. Don't cry about it. You can whine all you want. No one's going to listen to you. We don't care. And he was never a complainer. He still isn't. Even now in his, his ailing, his elder years and failing health, still doesn't bitch about it. It just is what it is. I'm okay. And I've just kind of learned that from him a lot. Mom, I guess maybe I learned some of my temper from her because she definitely wasn't a more emotional human being in that household. And I think Dad held it together.
Interesting. Yeah. Because I would say our dads, well, actually, maybe our moms too, similar. But, my dad was the same way. He was a pretty stoic dude, but, and a pretty tough dude. And, but he taught me the same things: work ethic and do what you say you're going to do. And don't be a bum. Don't be lazy, take care of your responsibilities, take care of your family stuff, whatever that happens to be. And it was interesting because so much of my life, I looked at my dad as this like tough guy, like scared of him, tough guy. And for much of my life, there was reason to be, because
Sure.
not the least of which was I was an idiot, so he tried to, get that out of me a little bit, which, may or may not have worked at various times. But, and then after my mom passed, and this was a long time ago, back in 2001, he became the biggest teddy bear I have ever seen in my life. And I don't remember. It's interesting because you said, I don't know if my dad and I ever said I love you to each other. And it was very similar with my dad. I think we started graduating to shaking hands, and right? Like instead of hugging or whatever, like.
Yeah, hugs were awkward at first. Yeah, there was like, well, what are we doing here? Are you okay? Are you sick?
So, it's funny because I feel like a very similar path in that regard. But then things really changed, after my mom passed, and became this big teddy bear, which I still think about all the time. And I still, there's something that ruminates in me that trying to, work that one out. But
yeah, one thing I'll digress on, Daryl, is, about the upbringing too. I think is important for both of us. And I know yours was the same way. There was never any handouts in my family. If you wanted something and you wanted, money, you were going to do something for said money. And that was it. You weren't getting an allowance for $10, give me a break, $5 or dollars or whatever. You weren't getting that unless you did some service to earn that. So I think we both learned at a very young age, if we wanted something, we had to work. So I started working, whether it be as a paper boy, then, at 12 years old, 11 years old, to then working at pizza places at 13. And riding my bike to the bank to pay a loan for my motorcycle that I wanted. He wasn't buying that. You want it, you earn it. I've got my own job. I gotta take care of this family. That stuff that's not important. You want it, you buy it. So I think we both, and I know I certainly did, learn the value of a dollar in work at a very young age.
Without a doubt. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was kind of the watchword of our family. And as far as just, work ethic and earn and deserve, those were kind of the things that I watched my dad do. I mean, and I know my mom, she took care of the kids, and I don't want to discount her. She worked real hard doing that. I can't imagine my brother, my sister, and I trying to work that whole nightmare out. But for my mom, but my dad was, he knew what he needed to do, and he wanted to rear us, my brother and I in particular, to emulate that. You had mentioned, earlier about the, the way to sort of make it in the world at that point, or what we could see at that point was, get a white collar job at GM, Ford, or Chrysler. And both of our dads were not the white collar guys. And, but my dad said to me at one point, he's like, hey, I can get you a job on the assembly line.
Right.
And I'm like,
oh yeah, I had that offer too. I'm like, yeah, I don't think so.
I'm like, and it could have been better money than I was making at that time. I don't remember what I was doing. It could have been a few bucks more, whatever. But there's something inside me that just said, Dad, there's a lot of things I want to emulate about you. Many things I want to emulate about you. And I feel, privileged if I have, because he was just that kind of a dude. But that's not one of them. That's not one of them. I want to have more than I started with in this world. And I just want to see if that's possible. So I think you're probably similar in that regard.
Yeah. I mean, and it's not to downplay the folks that, that take these auto jobs, because end of the day, if that's what makes you happy and you're fulfilled doing that, then God bless you. Fantastic. 100%. I just never knew that I was never going to be a happy person doing a menial job. I wouldn't even call it menial, but just doing a similar task for the rest of my life for a pension. It wasn't what I was playing for. Not to say that when I got out of college, if I would have ended up in a manufacturing rep job selling to the auto factories, I would have my path could have went differently. There's no doubt about it. So I think taking those chances in anybody's career, in anybody's life is very important, especially in your younger years. If you've got to settle in later in life, go for it, later in life. But I think you've got to really go for what you want early on.
100% agree. I mean, I think one of the things I talk about in my book is taking risks, right? And that was something I was not familiar with, in terms of that whole concept. That wasn't something we kicked around at the dinner table. It was
risks were a bad thing.
Yeah, like why would you do that when you can make
Right.
X number of dollars per hour and be safe and secure and et cetera, et cetera. And I don't, and same as you, like not downplaying whatever anybody does for a living. If it works to feed themselves, their family, and they're happy with it, please, by all means. I mean, we grew up with wonderful parents and two dads that were hard workers and great guys, and and they did jobs that we just decided that we didn't want to do for whatever reason,
Right.
Like I don't even know why necessarily I didn't take that job. I just think that I was and quote unquote destined to try other stuff, and it's not necessarily good stuff or bad stuff or better stuff or whatever, just different stuff. And luckily it worked out, and it worked out for both of us.
Yeah. And I think too, like my generation, my family, I was one of the first people, there was a handful of cousins or whatever that went to college, but prior to that wasn't an option for most people. They didn't do it. And getting the job in the factories was seen as success, and that's what it was. Now, granted, if you're coming from where my folks came from, which are coal mining families in Kentucky, getting a job in a factory with air conditioning or whatever it was at the time that paid you a salary with benefits and a pension, that was a huge success. So where they came from, that was a massive success. But we were already there. So did we really want to just stay there? Now, I've got cousins that are, that did the auto stuff and stayed in it, but a lot of them climbed up through the ranks and did more to it. I mean, one of them started in the plants and became the head of a union leader. I mean, they've done things above and beyond, and that's what you can do when you get into a big place. You can scale and do bigger things. But, the definition of success for our mom and dads were not the definition of success that you and I had by any means.
No, definitely not. And that was, and the generation was different. Like so many things were different. I feel like, I remember actually my dad having, I think it was when he had 40 years at GM. And I think he came home from that, sort of recognition of having 40 years at GM with a clock.
Yeah. Right.
A clock.
Yeah. Here you go.
Not a brand new GM vehicle, but a clock,
It was probably a Stanley clock or something like that was prevalent during our time.
Black and Decker or something. Yeah, it was
nonsense.
Yeah. So I did not want to be in that position. But so anyway, just thinking about it from that perspective, I like that you mentioned, that's where we started. So we didn't start where our parents started, right? We started in a different spot. And I think what was important to my dad at that time was stability, take care of the family, and healthcare is huge. It's a lot huger now, but even a pension, just not having to think about where the money's coming from, or is Social Security still going to be around? Those are reasonable things to deem as important. But getting into the entrepreneurial thing and which I think, I know you have a lot to offer from the perspective of hiring, of who you look for in an employee, of the things that you deem important based on your experience as far as, moving your business forward.
Sure.
What are those things?
I think it's twofold, one in the corporate world and one in the world I'm in now. The world I'm in now is very different, the client, the people you're hiring. But I will say to the folks that are looking to make their mark in from a corporate standpoint or even entrepreneurial, what I always look for is somebody with genuine confidence. And I don't mean arrogant. I don't mean belittling people. I mean someone with genuine confidence. That you walked into the room and you said, all right, I want to know that guy. You don't have to be the smartest guy in the room, but you need to carry yourself like you are. And you've got to have that confidence. And more importantly, you have to be able to take that confidence and relate to everybody in that room on different levels. You know, when I was working in the corporate world, we would negotiate a contract at legitimately $50 million. And I'd have a procurement agent in there all the way up to the CFO and the CIO. Now, every single person in that room had a different goal of what they wanted and what their personal win was. And I had to be, you know, astute enough to realize what their wins were and what mattered to them and speak it in their language and not, you know, only speak to the executive and downplay the procurement agent, because that was just a death sentence for me. So when I look for people from a hiring standpoint, you know, I look for people that had that confidence, that swagger a little bit, and likability. I mean, I don't care if it's sales, I don't care if it's management or leadership. If you want to have a team that follows you, you better damn well sure they like you. And if you think you're going to rule by fear, forget it. The second they get a better opportunity, they're out the door. So like when I went from job to a couple of jobs in my software career, my team came with me because we developed that kind of camaraderie and trust and the ability that we knew how to be successful together. So when I left CA, I built an entire team with the folks that worked for me at the prior company. And that was very typical of my industry. When you had a leader that you liked, you'd follow them because you trusted them and you knew they always had your back. So when I looked at folks, and it didn't have to have all the experience in the world, were they teachable? Could they learn? Could they shut up long enough to learn? That was always a big thing. I always struggled with, you know, folks that I brought into the company and wanted to change everything immediately. Well, we did it this way here, or what about this way? I'm like, listen, that may be a good idea, but you're trying to turn the Titanic around in a bathtub right now. How about you get in here, make your mark, and then try to make a change? Let's be realistic here. Just because you're used to it this way doesn't mean you were right or doesn't mean you were wrong. And with that said, you know, you've got to be able to adapt to change. There are people out there that have anything in their personal life, in their business life, change is the worst thing that can happen to them because it changes their routine and changes their mindset of thinking. I learned very quickly on in that world that if you don't adapt to change, they'll get rid of you because you've got to support what that company's goals and missions are. If you won't do that, they'll find somebody who does. So when you look at for folks like that, you know, you try to figure out, are these people are going to be the guys and girls that are going to do that for us and make us successful? You know, I told you before I had a mentor early on, and, you know, I told him when I took over the job, I said, I'm really looking for guys and girls that came up in that blue collar mindset, you know, maybe ex-college athletes because they know how to play as a team member, et cetera. And I don't like these silver spoon kids. And he said, that's short-sighted. Some of these silver spoon kids have the same ambition you do. They're starting where you started at and they want more. So don't neglect those guys and don't overlook them. They could be your shining star. Mm. So it came down to a lot about character, you know. I know it's much more prevalent now than it was in my day, but the job jumping stuff was always driving me nuts, you know, 10 jobs in 12 years. Well, there's some reason you didn't work out on those other 10 jobs in 12 years. And this one's not going to be your panacea and we're all going to be successful together. I just don't buy that. Never did. And I never was wrong. But that it really comes down to confidence, likability. And for people listening to this, if you hate public speaking and you think you're going to go into sales and you think you're going to stand in front of a boardroom and be successful, you better get used to it real quick. Because if you can't get up in the front of a room of people and exude confidence and relay your message of what you're trying to get and have your team behind you, then you're not going to make it. Then you're going to be the one listening to that message. So we had a saying, and I used it the other day I had a meeting with my CPA. I said, Roger, you're either reporting the news or you're making the news. Right now, you're just reporting the news to me, buddy.
No, I love it, man. I love it because, you know, I think you and I, based on where we come from and based on how our lives have gone, like we do kind of have a no BS policy when it comes to business. And I think also when it comes to life, and I think it's crucial to have that, you know, in terms of that's what kept us going, you know, that's what kept us able to continue to do what we did. But, you know, doing scary stuff. I mean, I would venture to think that if you looked at me and you said, you know, back in college and what I was like and whatever, you know, can you imagine Daryl, you know, doing a podcast someday? Or, you know what I mean? I didn't want to do it. I didn't think it wasn't comfortable for me. It wasn't anything that was fun when I started it, but right.
I mean, you were going to be the foreman of a huge construction company is what my guess was at, right?
Right.
Who knows what the hell people thought I was going to do? I have no clue.
Yeah, I got to think about that one a little bit.
Right.
But no, I would have definitely deemed you because you were always a no quit, always coming back for more, right? Like, I mean, that was you. And I knew that about you in basketball and, like that sort of thing. And
well, if you think back to when we played together and, met, if you look at that characteristic that we just talked about, that was who you and I were. And you look at the other people around us that had the success, that's who they were then. We were too young to know it, but that's exactly what those people were.
Right. You're right. We were too young to know it. And hindsight's 2020, right? I look back now and I'm like, oh yeah, Tony, and
right.
But yeah, and maybe you look back now and you're like, oh yeah, Daryl, but we weren't necessarily thinking that then, which is, it's interesting how perspective changes over time. So what would you say as far as I know you're big on victim mentality in terms of just, let's talk a little bit about that because this will help people. Okay. I think your perspective on this is
well,
good.
I mean, now, with the businesses I run now, we've got about 4 locations and 50 employees. And, I had to pivot my mindset dramatically from expectations from the corporate world. I try to bring some of those traits with me. And then I realized that that wasn't going to work in this kind of industry. It was,
kinder, gentler, Tony.
Yeah, you had to be, right. And so, as a leader, you still had to have these folks want to work for you and have your back no matter what, and therefore becoming trustworthy employees. So that challenged me dramatically in terms of that aspect of bringing folks on. And then you really wanted people that were just hungry and valued the role, that would appreciate it and everything else. Pivot back to your question. I'm sorry, I got sidetracked.
No, it's fine. I'm talking about victim mentality.
Yeah. So, obviously the business I own, frankly, they're bars. That's exactly what they are. And so, I'm very much, face out there, meeting customers, meeting people. And, you hear a lot of people, and whether it be current employees, former employees that, want to complain about their station in life. I really have a hard time digesting that when an individual could be doing 10 times more than they're actually doing. I can't do this. I can't pay this bill. I can't do that. Well, how about you maybe work more than 2 days a week? How about you pick up another job? How about you stop spending frivolously on stuff that you don't need? I'm confused. If you're struggling to make ends meet, literally, then why aren't you doing something to address it instead of complaining about it? So I really struggle as a person to be empathetic in those conversations. So I find myself going back to robot mentality and just saying, hey, this is on you. This is your fault. You could be doing so much more to get yourself out of this situation. You've been talking about this for years and years, but yet this is the same conversation we've been having for years and years. And I've had these conversations with dozens and dozens of people. So that just, I can't deal with it. Right. It's, they'll blame it on, the political structure. Oh, this cost, that cost. Listen, everything costs more than it cost 10 years ago, and it's going to cost more 10 years than it does now. What are you doing to keep up and address, and what are your goals, and what are you going to do about it? So victim mentality, I don't have a lot of sympathy for those folks. I really struggle to be empathetic towards them, because at the end of the day, what is your plan? Do you have a plan? Oh, you don't have a plan. Okay, so then how do you expect to get out of the situation you're in? And it's difficult. And yeah, that's always a catch-22. That's always a tough one, And I always do find that victim mentality is the crux of it, as we all know. I mean, you're simply blaming your woes on somebody else instead of taking ownership for why you're in the situation you're in. And I don't have sympathy for those folks, man. It's tough.
It is tough, and sometimes it's hard to hear. I mean, I have, people that I've known and people in my family, and just have that sort of mentality at times, and I can't get my head around it, because I can't imagine ever in my life that there isn't something I can do about whatever it is going on, whether it's okay, shut up and do nothing and allow something to unfold, or whether it's, you know what, and I've said this to Christina, my wife, many times, like, it doesn't matter. I would do anything now in my life. If she and I were struggling and we needed extra money, I would go stock shelves at Walmart if that's what I had to do. I wouldn't care.
There's no pride in that. I think at the end of the day, you've got to put the pride aside and do what you got to do to get where you got to go. And this is not just, and I've got a lot of friends and colleagues around me that, have sacrificed careers for family. Okay. They made a conscious decision that they're going to, pinch pennies and struggle a little different because their goal was to be there for their children. Okay. That's a goal. And that's what you chose to do. I don't hear those people complaining about having a victim mentality because they chose that route.
Right. Right. And they 100% chose it, and they own the fact that they chose it, and that's their life. And again, I know you and I can be a little bit hard sometimes, and probably because where we came from, and also what it takes to move life forward, sometimes, but and I don't want anybody to ever think, that we're not completely respectful of what other people decide to do, but the victim mentality, to me, and I think to you as well, isn't something that we can move our lives forward with. I mean, if somebody's suffering from that malady, and I'll call it a malady,
sure,
their life's not going anywhere, and it's not going to go anywhere while they're waiting for somebody else to make it better.
Yeah, I'm compassionate towards all people. Don't get me wrong. But if you think I'm going to feel bad for you for not trying, I'm not.
Right.
I refuse to. And if you think I'm going to feel bad for you for not trying and want a handout, you can double forget that one. It just, I don't understand that mentality coming from where we came from. And I'll go back to living in the basement for sheets as a wall. I went and did repos because I needed a roof over my head. I didn't complain about it. Did it suck? Yes, it sucked, but I did it. And I knew that there was something better for me. What was the plan? I was too naive and young to know what it was, but I knew that wasn't enough, and that was not going to get me where I wanted to go.
Right. So as we get closer to wrapping it up here, I'm interested because looking at life when we were looking at it when we met from 18, 19, 20 years old, whatever it was,
right,
to the way we're looking at life now. So I know we had a definition of success back then.
Yep.
And we probably have a very different definition of success now. So what was that sort of disparity like for you? How do you feel about success now versus then, that sort of thing?
So I would tell you, whether it be 15 years ago, maybe it was 15 years ago, I was making a lot of money, right? And things were very successful. Never worried about a bill, paid cash for what I wanted, carried no debt, it was very well off. And I thought that was success at that time. And as I continue to progress through that and continue to expand my portfolio of things I'm doing, et cetera, I always felt there was something missing. I didn't know what the hell it was. And I'm like, is this it? Is this what I reached for at 50 years old? I'm done. This is success and there's nothing else left. And I think at some point, if you're lucky enough in life, and it doesn't have to be with wealth, and don't get me wrong, but you get that, that altruistic part of you in some people comes out. And that's kind of where my mentality is now. And I was talking to a friend of mine, probably a year ago. And I said, I've always felt like I was meant for something more. And it doesn't mean I was meant to make more money. It was meant to leave a mark somehow. And I don't want to leave a mark when I'm dead by leaving all my money to something. I want to do it while I'm here. Right. So I think if you put a definition of success out there and you reach it and you still got a lot of life left in you and you're done, then you quit. And to me, I'm not done. What is that next step? I don't know what the heck it is. There's got to be something more. As you know, I'm very involved with the college. I set up a scholarship fund. It's not enough. I need to do more. I think I can help more people out. And it's by with what you're doing, words of wisdom and trying to steer them in the right direction so they don't make stupid mistakes that we did. or just helping them get to that next level because you know they deserve it and they're going to do something good with it. So before I would say level of success is you never worry about a bill, have everything you want. That's it. I've gotten away from that mentality whatsoever. Now it's like, how can I make an impact and do something that impacts the lives of others? And even now with what I'm doing, in this industry I am now, I do feel that there's people in my employment that I have absolutely changed their lives for the better. And that matters to me. And you know what? Those people appreciate it, and they're always going to have your back. And if they leave me in 5 years, I hope they do. I hope they leave for something bigger and better, because that's what I want for them. So that's a roundabout way of asking what success is to me, but that's kind of where my mentality is at now.
No, that's great, man. I love to hear that because, Christina and I, when we had the restaurant and moving through that little part of our lives, which, ended up being a great thing for us, but we'd have servers come in and, with the attributes of the people that you were talking about earlier, like they're able to, be teachable, they're hard workers, they care, like all of these great things. And we were like, you know what? You better not be a server here 2 years from now. Because you can do things so, and not that there's anything wrong with this, because servers do really well. And
absolutely.
But I think there's, with some of these folks, we're like, you know what? You could own the freaking world. And I've said that to people before. And I've said that in many of the businesses that I've been involved with, like I'll meet someone and they'll just ping with me. And I'm like, you are a special person. You gotta keep going. You got to keep moving. You got to keep growing, because you're going to be in the freaking head of the boardroom someday.
No, there's no doubt. You meet those folks and say, you should own this place in 5 years. You shouldn't be working here in 5 years. Those people that have that skill. And I think that's something that I was lucky enough along the way of my career to have a couple people. And I won't say it's a ton, but I would say it's 3 or 4 that really saw that in me too. And I'm probably going to come off arrogant when I say this. They might have looked at me and said, I can make money from this guy. This guy's going to make me more money. I'm going to groom this guy because he's going to make me successful. Other of those same people, when I said, I really like this guy can be very successful, I'm going to help him. So there's 2 ways to look at that. I don't care what their goal was. I got what I got, the end game was good for me no matter what. But, on the same token too, we talked about this. There's some people you meet along the way that you learn something from in your life. Doesn't have to be good. It might have been bad, as long as you learn something. That's for sure.
Right. Yeah. I'm one of the things, I don't think I've said it in a while, but I used to say it all the time, is the most important things I've learned in my life is what I don't want.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I mean, we've talked about this before. The mistakes you make in life are just that. Learn from them. Don't repeat them. You're probably going to repeat them, but learn from them, and, failing is all part of it. There's no getting around it. There's 1,000 books out there. Fail to success. And we all did. How many times did we get our teeth kicked in and we went back for more punishment? And most people say you're out of your mind. We just kept doing it until you get to the other side of that line.
Right. Yeah. But in the end, there's so many things that we glean from that, not to mention just growing personally, growing financially. I mean, our outlook on life has changed, completely, because we're able to look back and look at all the scars and the, bumping our heads and getting concussions and getting our teeth kicked in. And, that's what shaped us. And that's what puts us in a position where, and I think, which is really crucial, and I love to hear you talk about it, is wanting to give back. I want to help the people that have that potential and that want to utilize it and help them move forward.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I get involved with some mentoring here and there, and I'm always open to do it. I struggle with it at times when the people don't want to hear what I'm saying, but I love it when they do. So if you're going to ask for folks out there, if you're looking for a mentor, listen to what they're saying. If you push back, then what do you need them for? But yeah, I mean, I'm always apt to do that, especially with young students and people that are earlier in their careers, really just asking for genuine advice of what should I do? How should I handle this? And the people that are willing to listen are people you want to give your time to. The people that want to argue with you while you're mentoring them, Oh, boy, I don't understand those folks. But why'd you call me?
Right, exactly. If you already knew the answer, why are we talking right now?
Right.
And I've been through so much of that, and I'm sure you have too. But it boils down to a saying we used to say a long time ago when we were in sales, and some will, some won't. So what? Who's next? Right?
Yeah.
Like that's just
So
you can't lead people somewhere where they're not going to go.
Yeah, my saying was always, so what, and who cares?
Right.
Because all right, what's this about, and who cares about it? If you're not if you're not taking your message to the party that cares about it, you're wasting your time.
Take it to the next party that will care. Yeah,
move on.
100%. So we got to wrap it up, man. I've enjoyed this immensely. Talking with you, catching up. Hearing your story was phenomenal. Hearing your thoughts around business and success, and all those things has been great to hear. And I appreciate you coming on, brother. And
Absolutely.
And I will say, and this is from the bottom of my heart, like, in terms of, being in my life and part of my story, I am very grateful for that, and grateful that we've become, such wonderful friends.
Daryl, I can't say enough about that. I got your back for the rest of your life.
You as well, brother. Thank you, man.
Thank you.